Hey everybody, this is Mike. Today is August 8th, 2020. Some people call this, the Lion's Gate. This time corresponds with the heliacal rising of the dog star Sirius, very, very significant to the ancient Egyptians, and all of the groups that find Sirius, the dog star, of significance. We just came off of that huge explosion within Beirut, which almost perfectly lines up with the 75-year anniversary of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the 25-year anniversary of the birth of the internet. You know, that happened when the IPO of Netscape Communications, which was the same day of the death of Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. You know, I go into that in a video I made years ago about 2020, the next big thing. And I think I made that in probably like 2017, 2018. That was published. You can see that on the channel here. But it's you know, we're in interesting times right now. Like every day gets stranger and stranger. In the manuscript "The Art of War" by Sun Tzu, says that the most powerful or the most effective warfare is when your opponent doesn't even realize there's a war being waged upon them and they don't even know who their enemy is. And I would say that is what is happening to the majority of humanity right now. And it's almost like, you know, it's a bad movie. It's a bad movie because what do we have here? We've got what is being told, what we're actually seeing, or what's being presented through the computer is that, you know, the supposed world's richest man is utilizing organizations that which he privately funds to bolster an idea to inject the entire humanity with this sort of like brand new technology of a vaccine. You know, it's like an Austin Powers film. You know, it's like Dr. Evil. This is literally what's happening. Like, just like Dr. Evil, like he giggles when he says, like, you know, what's in store for humanity, and like regardless of how ridiculous it sounds, you know, it's seemingly working. And you know, when you go and you see this, you know, this was floated out there for all of us about, like, you know, the pervasive messages for COVID-19 vaccine uptake. You know, it's like there's no hiding the fact that, yeah, they're focus grouping. You know, they already know what it's going to be said. At least I would think. You know, it shouldn't be difficult. Like, all of the conclusions of the pervasive messages are, you know, those are the same techniques which have always worked and which they have been using. But you know, you can see this is the game which is at in play. And you know, this is how it's always done. It's escaping me right now, but there was a technique developed by the Rand Corporation years ago where they would train people to go into municipal hearings and be able to gather the Delphi technique. That's what it was called, the Delphi technique. It's like, you know, a way which you would go to a public hearing and be able to get everyone on your side and really ostracize those who do not fit with your particular viewpoint. You know, it's gaslighting. It's all of this sort of stuff. This emotional manipulation. That's what we're seeing is happening right now, and it's working. You know, I'm seeing people, and I think it's even more so than that. You know, I don't have any proof, but I'm open to this idea. I've seen people really in the last week, people who I know very well who should be questioning and rejecting all of this based upon what their understanding and belief systems were prior to all of this quarantine stuff, who are just accepting without any sort of question. And I'm like, how did that happen? How did they have this complete about face as it relates to either authority or natural health or anything like that? Which made me believe, I'm like, is it more insidious than just like, gaslighting, manipulation? Like, is there something which is actually, brain mind control, whether through food, whether through the aerosols, whether through electromagnetic waves, through 5G, I don't know, but I'm definitely seeing strange behavior. Which is kind of, the purpose of today's talk. Which is, and I hinted at it last week, and it's today's talk is about the real internet. And so we begin with, well, what's the false internet? False internet's what we're using right now. It's an inversion internet. I've talked about this many times, and this is almost going to be like, if you remember the movie Speed, Keanu Reeves right here, this came out in 94. The idea of the movie Speed is like, there's this bus and it's going down the highway, and if it drops below 50 miles per hour, it's going to explode. So what they need to do is get everyone off this bus, and onto another bus while never dropping below 50 miles per hour. And they got to make certain that there's always a place for the bus to drive and all this sort of stuff. And, this is a popular movie in 1994. But that's kind of the ideal which is in front of us, because we are all involved, addicted, yours truly right here, to this to technology, and primarily through the internet, which is why all of this stuff is going to happen, because we're, we're all addicted to needing phones and the computer technology and Zoom now to go and all that sort of stuff. It needs to go away. It needs to go away. And I don't believe that it is, to go back to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. That's not what I want, but it can't be what we have. And so that's why it's like Speed. Like, how do we go from this one thing, which is, we can all see, like, if you're watching this video, you know that the internet and technology is anti-human and anti-earth. It came from DARPA. All of the language, embedded in the companies, it's all sick. All of their symbology, it is death, and it is destructive. It is everything on the internet, from social media to gambling to porn to nonstop, like, materialism of buying things. It brings out the worst in humanity. You need to get off it, and we're all friggin' crack babies on this. We've all been born into it, and the technology has slowly been normalized as to, like, oh, technology is great for us. But no, it's not great for us, and we know that. But we need to have another bus to go off of, and that second bus is what I'm going to call is the right side up internet. We'll get to that in a moment. But I want to say this. I want you to keep this in mind right now. We've got quotes like these, which are often, like, if you're familiar with them, if you've ever heard of these, they're always said kind of like, in this idea of, oh, people in the past were so silly, they were so stupid, they weren't smart like us. This guy who is the commissioner of the U.S. Patent Office in 1889 said everything that could be invented has been invented. And like, oh, how silly. Well, if you look at that another way, what they're saying is, like, our life is so content right now, we don't need anything else. We don't need anything else. Same thing is said right here with this, quote from Ken Olsen, the president of DEC. What was that? Digital Equipment Corporation. This was like, a computer company from the 70s. He's like, there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. And I think this was taken a little bit out of context, but nonetheless, it reinforces this idea to all of us modern folks, like, oh, they were so silly then. Like, how can you imagine what life would be like without technology, without being able to check your email constantly? It's like they did. There was not a need for it. People had satisfied, rich, full lives then. They're as fucked up then as they are now. Probably less. I'm going to say they're probably less, or maybe in a different way. But we do not need the technology. We've gotten addicted to it. It was designed from the very beginning, from the hardware to the software, to make you addicted, to make me addicted, to make us all addicted. But we need to get off it. Because if you decide, if you say that this is the life which I need the technology, I need my phone, I need to be in touch with people, I need this for my job, I need all this sort of stuff, well, guess what? You're going to take your vaccine with the who knows what's going to be in it. The few things we know about, like the change in the gene editing software, but what else is in there we do not know, what it purposes. But if you don't want that, and that's the beauty of right now, it's become like now we have this opportunity to move off of it. There's this window, and so right now what I'm hoping to do is encourage to. I'm still on the internet. I still have it. I'm at a place right now. It's like if you've ever given up cigarettes, if you've ever given up alcohol, if you've ever given up like any sort of substance which you know that is not good for you, you do not want it in your body, you have to start with an idea. You need to come to this realization that, hey, I'm going to give up this stuff. Maybe it's in a month from now, maybe it's in a year, but I know that this is something I'm going to give up. So that's where we are right now. I'm not exactly certain how it's going to work, but in order to go from one speeding bus to another, because if you don't have another speeding bus, what you're going to do is you're just going to jump off the speed bus and roll on the ground. You're going to become like living a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which maybe that's what you want. Who knows? I don't. I think that we've been given like this false dichotomy of you could either live in this really, really, they used to call it the Venus Project. Who remembers that? That was out maybe about 8 years ago. That was what the future, the smart city was going to look like. The Venus Project, where everything is controlled by AI. Or you get to go and live in a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And you can't even live hunter-gatherer lifestyle just because of private property and laws and stuff like that. But I'm suggesting there's probably more, and that's, why this idea of Tartaria and there being other models of which humanity have lived in, I say quote-unquote high civilization. Typically civilization, anything which is hierarchical, should be questioned regardless of whatever ethnicity you can think of. If they have a hierarchy in their culture, it was sick. Whenever you've got certain people living off of the other, whether that was found in South America, Mesoamerica, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, they all had it. They all had hierarchical systems, and the people on the bottom of the rung always got the shaft, and they were always fighting it. They were always put up against each other to fight so that the people on the top can take advantage of it. This also is probably, there's a link why in these hierarchical civilizations, they're always eating carbohydrates and sugars because of what that does to the brain. But, that's another topic. But that being said, there are other ways, or at least we have to begin to become open to other ways in which we live in a more sophisticated lifestyle. What I mean by that is our entire existence is not survival. That when our survival needs are not in question, we can experience life in a much, much higher way. And that, to me, is the true nature of the higher civilization, where we get to really understand the beauty of being human, the richness of our creativity, of our desire for travel, our desire to interact, our desire to have adventures. And so this is where the true internet, is coming into play. So what is the true internet? internet? What is the real internet? Because we know what the false internet is. And we know it's false. So how do we know it's false? We know it's false because it comes from the military-industrial complex. We know it's false because everything which we do on the internet is bringing out anti-human behaviors. We know it's false because to actually make the hardware, we have to destroy the earth. We have to, there's slave labor involved with building of it. Everything about it is false. It's inverted. We live in an inverted culture. You know, none of this should be a surprise to you. So then the question is, well, what is the true internet? And again, we're looking at this as an idea. You know, we've got to have another bus. And I'm not certain exactly how it's going to work. You know, I've definitely have clues, and I've certainly seen many, many things in my own life. But let's begin. So, begin to talk about, like, what is the true internet. So I brought this up last week. And last week I talked a lot about Dr. Williams and the synchronicities within my own life, of all of the stuff, of cleaning out his basement and how that tied into my life and the things which I took from it. And this right here is one of the books, and I took this from his library. You know, this would have just been thrown away. This was part of my compensation. I got to take some stuff. So it's called The Secret Life of Plants. Secret Life of Plants is written in 1973, and it's by Peter Tompkins. And the subtitle is A Fascinating Account of the Physical, Emotional, and Spiritual Relations Between Plants and Man. And so what this book is it goes through and it shows, it describes all of these different scientific experiments which were done in the 70s and the 60s, which showed the sentient, the consciousness not only within plants, but then between humans and plants. And you know, I've been familiar with this idea, but there was something which really clicked with me. I've been holding this idea of the true internet for some time, and I used to think of it mostly as it relates to water, you know, through books like this, you know, the hidden messages of waters. And all of these books are highly controversial, and we'll get into the controversy about that a little bit more. So I'm saying we're beginning to look at this as ideas, and you'll understand a little bit more in a bit. But initially, the hidden water, the hidden messages in water, was a demonstration of water being programmable, and it could hold memory and all this sort of stuff. And with all of the research I've done on Susquehanna alchemy, the Susquehanna River, rivers in general, all this sort of stuff, like it went hand in hand. You know, synchronicity being like the true algorithm, like, you know, by being really connected through water is how we are able to really like hook up to this true internet, if you will. But then when I saw this book again, this plant book, I'm like, whoa, it's not just water. And I just, like, all of these things which are always in the back of my mind just started, like, really connecting. So it's like, you know, there's another popular book that came out, like, I don't know, like 5 years ago. It was called The Hidden Life of Trees. And it's saying the same thing about trees, which we're seeing, which this book is saying about plants, about like the communication between the trees and their root systems, and how everything is stored information, and how the environment communicates, not just between each other, but then also within humanity. And then we also know the same thing with mushrooms. And then this whole idea of crystals and minerals. And then we begin to look at the actual internet, which is made up of hardware, which is made up of firmware, and which is made up of software. And we begin to think of the real internet, which is made up of hardware, crystals, minerals, stones. And we begin to look at like firmware, and, you know, and we've got like plants and we've got trees, and then we got this software, which is this water, and we begin to see that there is this interconnection between the complete environment, which we've always been surrounded in. But the problem is, we've always kind of taken it for, there are two things. I would say there's two issues with this natural internet. One is, it's very subtle. Part of what has happened over the past 100 years, maybe even longer than that, is that we have been really conditioned to need like very, very like strong, intense, messages to our senses, and so I'll give you and this happens by things becoming more and more refined. So, let's think about like, cocaine, it begins as the coca leaf, and that has a natural sort of like stimulant quality if one were to chew it. And it's been chewed and used for a very, very long time within humanity. But then through a refining process of like really, really becoming more and more like, taking that little bit of zing, if you will, and really, really refining it. And then we get this substance, which is really undeniable. Like when cocaine hits your system, it is much, much more noticeable than chewing of a coca leaf. But we also understand the immense destructiveness of this refinedness. We see the same thing with cacao and cocoa, of the benefits of cacao to humanity, but then as it's refined and added with sugar, what that has done, and where, your typical person, if they were to drink unsweetened cacao, it would not be as pleasurable of an experience because they've become so accustomed to these very refined sort of experiences. The same thing is true with what we've learned with like the internet. So what truly is the internet? Like I've described, all inversions contain an element of truth. And so the element of truth is the internet shows an interconnection, a place to store information, to receive information, where time and space are not limiting factors. And if you look at all of these like books and like what they're suggesting, like maybe like kind of like becoming a little bit more subtle with the ideas and looking at them as a holistic picture as opposed to like individual pieces, that there is this interconnection throughout the environment that we find ourselves living in. And we are able to access information. We're able to store information. We're able to communicate information across great distances. I mean, you read these books and, it talks a lot about how plants receiving information from the stars. And like, you go and you look at the doggone people of Africa and their understanding of Sirius. Remember, that's where we began this talk. And you listen to the stories of the peoples in the Amazon, and they understood how to make ayahuasca because the plants told them stuff, and the plants told the doggone people about the truth of what's going on in the stars. Like, this information is all around us, or at least there are hints that it's all around us. But it's more subtle. And so maybe this used to always be kind of like hippy-dippy kind of stuff, but it is becoming a necessity. It is becoming a necessity for your survival. Because if you do not jump off of this bus, if you're not jumping off of this bus to something else, this is your only option. If it's not this option, you fight it, which is still that option. You're going to go and force yourself back into this system which you've been born into, which has been normalized. You're like, oh, I want to go back to how it used to be. It's never been yours. It's never been ours. It's always been inverted, and it's always been sick. There is and by sick, I mean anti-human, anti-earth. So what I'm hoping to do is introduce this idea. And not saying it like, these are just, these ideas in books, but through experience. And this is one of the reasons I like to share my personal story, because I believe that is the true nature, the true benefit of being connected to this other true internet is it acts as your navigation for life. In the same way Google and Google Calendar and Google whatever has become your navigation for life, that is an inversion. And when you are truly connected, and whatever that may mean, maybe that means something different for different people, with the true internet. And now now's the time it's got to get strong. You got to get off the old one and onto the new one. Not necessarily, not today, maybe not tomorrow, but coming up. Because if you don't have any other options. So this is where it's going to get really kind of, we're going to get a little bit tricky with this, or a little bit more complex. So let's go to this right here. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. This is accredited to William Casey, the director of the CIA. He supposedly said it to Reagan, and supposedly verified by this woman who was on Mae Brussel. She used to do this show back in, I want to say, the 80s and 90s. She Who Remembers, when I first started going through my own personal research and waking up, I got the all of her archives and listened to all of them, and it was immensely significant for me, and I learned a bunch of stuff, and that was very helpful. But this is where this quote originates from. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Again, we don't know, but it came from a source which I've experienced to be accurate. But that doesn't mean that it still cannot be. I can't verify for myself. But that being said, this is part of what seems to be the CIA program. And the CIA and espionage and state espionage and intelligence is the key to the workings behind what's going on in our modern world, whether the CIA, whether Mossad, whether MI6, and this all goes back to John Dee, who was the original 007, who was also the inventor of, or the inspirer, I would say, for the computer technology industry, as the first computer was ENIAC. So the point I'm trying to make with all of that is it's always been connected. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because I made some reference to some books, right? I made reference to The Secret Life of Plants, and a lot of The Secret Life of Plants, Peter Tompkins was the author. He makes reference, where all of this comes from is this guy, Clive Baxter, who was the first person really in the 60s who introduced the idea of, plants being sentient. So when you just do the simplest of scratching of the surface, you go and you see, let's see what we got here. Here's some of the books. Secret Life of Plants, right here, 1973, by Peter Tompkins. The book documents controversial experiments that claim to reveal unusual phenomenon regarding plants, such as plant sentience, discovered through experimentation. A lot of this experimentation has been claimed to have not been able to have been duplicated. It goes back and forth. Well, the reason why it can duplicate it because the experimenter and consciousness plays into it. I don't know, because I've never played in. Actually, that's not true. That is not true at all. I've done my own experimentation, and I have known that I have thought about flower. I have sat with a hibiscus tree, and every day for 30 days, I had envisioned a platonic solid in the base of that plant, and after 30 days, it flowered for 20 days straight. A different flower every day. So I know that happened from my own experience. Whether that's conclusive of anything, I don't know, but I do know that. I do know that synchronicity lines up in my life immensely. But we do know there's some controversy about this book. I talked about The Hidden Life of Trees. This is this also the author of that book. Here we go and see right here. It's Peter, I don't know how to pronounce his name. The Hidden Life of Trees, what they feel, how they communicate. It's very complementary in concepts to The Secret Life of Plants. And we could even say, we could see in this book, even this idea of the wood wide web is being introduced, which is, really goes hand in hand to what I'm suggesting, just a little bit more, not as deeply. But let's go to the controversy. The controversy, I talked about Clive Baxter. He's the guy who began. Well, where did Cleve Baxter begin? He began with the CIA. He was an interrogation specialist for the CIA, best known for his experiments with plants using a polygraph instrument in the 60s that led to his claim of primary perception and that plants feel pain and have ESP. All right? So where a lot of Peter Tompkins' original research began. And you go and you look into Peter Tompkins. And where did he begin? He began as a spy for the OSS. He wrote a book called, he worked for the OSS and was utilized as an undercover agent in Italy in 1944 and wrote a book, A Spy in Rome. The OSS is the predecessor to CIA. So now we've got these two, all of this idea of plant sentience, which I've seen that to be true. Supposedly a lot of scientists have been able to replicate these experiments showing the sentience. A lot have said that they have not, but we go and we see that these two, they connect directly to the CIA. We could go back to mushrooms, the introduction of magic mushrooms to the American public was through Gordon Wasson. And Gordon Wasson was, here, he was the ethnomycologist. He was the vice president of public relations for J.P. Morgan, and he worked for CIA. He did CIA-funded research. It was his research that was on the cover of Time Life Life magazine I think it was in the early 60s, which introduced mushrooms and the psychedelic culture and the counterculture of the 60s. It all came from this guy. This guy worked for the CIA, and he put it on Henry Luce's. He was the editor of Life magazine. He was Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones is where the CIA comes from, or the OSS. When you begin to see, it is all connected. Let's go back to this. Guess what? You're right. We don't know. We don't know what to believe. Now, that does not necessarily mean that there's falsities. It just means that we need to go into it with a degree of both skepticism and then also openness. We are in uncharted territory right now. So I guess I'm going to wrap this up right now. It looks like, and we'll see, we are on the verge of lockdown 2.0. And what I think is going to happen in lockdown 2.0 is, or what seemingly is going to happen, is it's going to be a lot worse than lockdown 1.0. And where it's going to get really bad is there's going to be consequences. It's going to be monitored, fines, jail, all this sort of stuff. Maybe that was not in 1.0, it was not readily available. 2.0, it's going to be readily available. And so who knows what's going to happen. I personally don't believe that when the same level of consciousness which created the problem cannot solve the problem. I don't think that facing it on the same level of consciousness is the solution. I think the solution is something much, much deeper. But part of it is going to have to be, because this is how it's going to be monitored, or at least part of it is the technology. And this is going to be a motivation for needing to get off of technology. And what I'm going to be suggesting, and we're going to begin to play with it, I suggest you begin to play with it in a very, very real way, is what is the other bus which you can jump onto. I hope to not be making these videos anymore because I don't want to be on technology anymore. And hopefully I'm going to be seeing people face to face. That's what they don't want, is it? But we know that that's where the solution is going to be. And the potentiality, because there is no going back, my friends. There's no going back to what life used to be. There's only envisioning of a new story and a new narrative, and hopefully you're not caught up in the dystopian future which has been planted in our minds through the Hollywood media system. And we can start to come up with something which is much more pro-human, much more pro-earth, much more joyful, much more growth, much more adventure, much more, all of the things which we want for humanity. Much more creative, much more artistic, a whole lot more laughter. So that is my desire, that is my intent, that is my wish, for me and my future and for those who I care about. And, if you're watching this video, that includes for you as well. So this is Mike. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Feel free to comment. For as long as we still need money systems, go to my website, susquehannaalchemy.com. One of the things I'm doing right now is I'm telling you your story. And so I do that called the Starboard Light. Right now, my website doesn't seem to be working. If that's something you're interested in, send me an email, and we could do this through PayPal, and I'll walk you through it. You fill out a form, and then we set up a thing, Here's the hypocrisy, we're going to be using the technology, but hopefully soon we won't be using the technology. But for as long as that's the case where we are right now, that's what we've got to use, but we got to start envisioning a new way where all of their systems are not where we live our lives. So, with that being said, enjoy your day, have some fun, hug the ones you love, start taking your natural world in a new perspective, start to develop the ability to pick up much more subtle things. All right, I'm out of here. See ya.